can't match the laser-sharp visual effects of Vectrex, because only Vectrex has a real arcade screen built in.
Give up my Atari? My television?
How about for this?
You bet your asteroids.
Voittaa videopelittää, on turha niiden selittää, kun vakuudeksi hyvyyden loi Vectrex.
Chosen 2-to-1 over Atari and Intellivision for real arcade gameplay. So compare. Discover how Vectrex brings real arcade play home.
In the year of 1982, the global gaming market was much different to the present day. Home computers were starting to boom, manufacturers were releasing consoles for the very first time, and the gaming arcade reigned supreme. The flavour of the month for arcade games were those that used vector graphics, rather than the otherwise widely used raster graphics. Developers such as Cinematronics and Atari were leading this trend, with games like Rip-Off and even the official game for Star Wars receiving a great response. The resultant of this phase in gaming was the Vectrex. Released in 1982 for the home market by General Consumer Electronics and then later by Milton Bradley, the Vectrex featured a built-in vector display and had ports of many popular vector-based games of the time. It was like having an arcade at home, and a TV wasn't even necessary. It also had the distinction of being the only home-based console ever to use vector graphics, and was even the first to have a peripheral that supported 3D graphics by a headset. It was sadly only on the market for 2 years, but it's because of these reasons and more that it's a wonder of the retro gaming world. The Vectrex's development history starts in early 1981, however, with the two companies Western Technology and Smith Engineering, both of which were owned by J. Smith. Smith was previously notable as the creator of the Microvision, which was the first handheld game console to use interchangeable cartridges, although that is a wonder of the retro gaming world for another day. The story of the Vectrex goes that two employees of the companies, John Ross and Mike Purvis, had come into possession of small cathode ray tubes, abbreviated to CRTs, from a surplus warehouse in Los Angeles and toyed with the idea of creating a game console from them. Smith gave Ross and Purvis his blessing and became the head of the project. After initially pitching the idea with various manufacturers using the codenames HP3000 and Vectrex, they got a bite from the toy manufacturer, Kenner Products. An idea was born of a handheld vector-based console with a 5-inch screen and was to be called the Kenner Mini Arcade, although unfortunately, negotiations fell through in the July of '81. It was then in the September that General Consumer Electronics took notice, and with the stipulation that the console be changed to a tabletop device with a 9-inch screen, the now called Vectrex entered a very brisk development period. The actual monitor used is a Samsung 240RB40 and is an off-the-shelf product which was commonly used in black and white TVs at the time. The actual vector generator used was developed by Gary Carr, however, and is very similar to the technology used in early oscilloscopes. Otherwise, it ran on a Motorola 6809 CPU with a kilobyte of RAM and 8 kilobytes of ROM. It came with a rather large built-in controller that included a joystick, as well as a built-in speaker powered by a General Instruments chip. Although each game came on a cartridge that ranged in size from 4 to 8 kilobytes, a built-in game called Mindstorm was included that was a derivative of Asteroids. Even though it's a black and white monitor, color is somewhat achieved by transparent overlays that came with every game. They also added static graphics and decorations. Having to use overlays for mock color was a minor drawback though, since vector graphics were seen as quite revolutionary at the time compared to raster graphics. And if you're wondering what the difference is, rasters are used in just about everything else and involves pixels that are constantly refreshed. Since the resolution possible for raster graphics at the time were quite low, I'm assuming that vectors would have looked quite futuristic in comparison. The Vectrex was finally unveiled at the 1982 Summer CES in Chicago and then released to the public in November of the same year for $199. The board game manufacturer Milton Bradley saw the initial excellent sales of the Vectrex and wanted to get in on the action. It bought General Consumer Electronics in early 1983 and fussed the Vectrex and expanded its reach with their already established distribution channels. That same year the Vectrex was then released in Europe and even Japan via a co-branding agreement with Bandai and was named the Bandai Vectrex Kusokuzen. However, all then sadly went south with the infamous game crash of 1983. We'll take a closer look at that particular dark time of the Vectrex in a moment, but a console isn't much about its games and peripherals, so for a second, let's turn our attention to those.
You really get the feel of Grand Prix racing with this Vectrex video game. All Vectrex cartridges take you to the limit because Vectrex is the high-performance video game machine. It's portable with a built-in screen and vector graphics, sharper, faster, more responsive than ordinary.
I sadly don't personally own a Vectrex as their availability is scarce in Australia, and the ones I have found cost more than my PS4 at launch. However, here's a photo of me with bad bed hair playing one as proof that I've actually touched one. It's because of this though that you should know that all gameplay footage shown was captured with a RetroPie. Over the short lifetime of the Vectrex, 29 official games were released. All Vectrex owners would at least be familiar with Mindstorm since it was built in, but some other notable titles include ports of Berserk and Pole Position, as well as Spike, Bedlam and Star Trek The Motion Picture. The games that really gave the Vectrex attention, however, were those that were ported across from the arcade by Cinematronics. A licensing deal was struck where Vectrex game developers would have full access to Cinematronics Vector games for release on the Vectrex, and vice versa. This led to games like Cosmic Chasm and Space Wars being big sellers for the Vectrex, since they were so popular in the arcades at the time. There are a few notable rarities too. Mindstorm actually had a bug that would cause scoring errors at level 13. If you contacted GCE and complained, they would send an amended version titled Mindstorm 2. Mindstorm is a reasonably hard game as it is though, so it's assumed that not many players actually ever got to level 13 and found the bug, which is why the sequel is so rare. Another rare game is a derivative of the game Clean Sweep by the liquor company Mr. Boston. This was a promotional item, included few differences to Clean Sweep, one of which being that you controlled a top hat instead of a vacuum cleaner. Approximately 4 copies now exist, and the last known sale went for $3,400. There were 2 peripherals released, one of which was the 3D imagery goggles developed by John Ross. This was a rather uncomfortable headset that generated a 3D illusion by the use of a spinning disc in front of the player's eyes. 180 degrees of the disc is black, then there are 3 transparent 60-degree wedges of the colours red, green and blue. It's because of those that the 3 official games released are actually in colour. As mentioned before, this was the first known instance of 3D gaming in the industry. Sega incorrectly claimed that they were the first with the 3D glasses released for the Master System in 1987. However, they later had to pull all advertising claiming the fact when the 3D imager was realised. Since it was unfortunately released in 1984, right at the end of the Vectrex lifetime, the 3D imager goggles are quite rare and sought after. The other peripheral is the Vectrex Light Pen. This allowed users to draw on the screen of the Vectrex and worked by use of a photo detector on the pen that detected bright and dark spots on the screen. Like the goggles, only a few games were officially released. The pack-in game was called Art Master and was a paint package, another release was Animation, which was for animation, and lastly there was Melody Master, which was a music creation program. The Light Pen was released in 1983 and is also quite sought after. The Vectrex sadly came to an unhappy end in 1984, only 2 short years after release. This was a mix of the video game crash of 1983 and the fact that Hasbro bought out Milton Bradley in the May of the same year. The price was originally dropped from $199 to $149 and then later to $100 in 1983. After finally being discontinued late in 1984, the Vectrex was on clearance for only $49. When everything was said and done, it's been suggested that over its lifetime, the Vectrex cost Milton Bradley $32 million. Jeez, it wasn't all sadness though, because when it was discontinued, all rights were then released back to J. Smith and his companies. Smith first used this in 1988 with an idea to release a colour handheld version of the Vectrex, but sadly this didn't go anywhere. What he did do, however, was release the entire product line into the public domain in the mid-90s. This has since allowed emulators, websites, and a plethora of homebrew games to exist. I recommend checking out a webpage linked below from a fantastic Vectrex resource I found called the Vectrex Museum. That lists all the games for the Vectrex, either those released officially, as prototypes, and homebrews. You'll see that the homebrew list absolutely ellipses anything else, with dozens of games released from 1996 up until 2011. J. Smith should be commended for doing what he did, since the Vectrex now has one of the biggest homebrew scenes for any console. Not only does his actions benefit gamers and programmers, but also the Vectrex itself, which got to live a life much longer than what Milton Bradley or Hasbro would have ever allowed. And with that, I want to thank you for watching. A special thanks goes to Viewer Award winner for suggesting the Vectrex for this episode. If you have suggestions of your own, then please let me know here or by social media. Otherwise, all sources for this video can be found in the description box down below. And if you want to watch more wonders of the retro gaming world, then check out the playlist on my channel page. This is the 5th episode in this series. Otherwise, thank you again so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.